Hi there. Before I start, I'd like to ask all of you a question. Who eats fish? If you eat fish, please put your hands up. That's what I would expect to see in a Cornish audience. That's excellent. I've got a follow-up question. Could you please keep your hand up if the last time you ate fish you knew where and how it was caught? So not that many of you. And please keep your hand up if you know who caught it. Okay, 2 of you, 3 of you. Excellent. Okay, so those questions are questions that I've spent a lot of time thinking about because of 3 experiences that I've had in my working life. And I'd like to convince you through this talk that those are 3 questions that really are worth asking. As was just said, I started with a very fish-eye view of things. I did a biology degree, I learned to scuba dive as a teenager, and I've always been really interested in coral reef ecology, marine ecology, and all of the species you find in the sea. But over the last 15 years, I've basically realized that the social and economic aspects of fisheries are equally, if not more, important. The first stage on this journey takes us to Honduras, to Central America, where I had the privilege of working in 2004. I spent a year out there running a coral reef mapping project and working with local lobster fishermen. Now, over that year, the fishermen were always telling me about this fabled Grand Banks, this big area out to the north coast in the Caribbean where they fished for lobster. So in 2006, I went back there with a group of cameramen to research the working conditions in the industrial lobster fishery. At the same time, some colleagues were going to villages along the Caribbean coast, talking to villagers who were also engaged in that fishery. Now that sounds really like a big adventure, doesn't it? It sounds very glamorous. It sounds, there's boats, there's Caribbeans, there's lobsters. It sounds fantastic. I had this sort of, it's quite an exciting opportunity. But when I actually found out the reality of this situation, I was fairly shocked because people are actually dying and getting paralyzed to catch the lobster. So unlike here in Cornwall, where people would use traps or pots to catch lobster, people out there are scuba diving for them. And in a country like Honduras, there's very limited resources, and these people are engaging in a fishery with no training, and as a result they're getting bent, which is basically when your body can't diffuse the nitrogen that you've been breathing in under pressure, and they can often get paralyzed or even worse. As you can see from the photo behind me, it's not a high-tech fishery. So they start on a big boat like the one I was on, and then they go out in canoes, which they call a dory. 2 men on every boat, one takes charge of the canoe and the other one dives. They'll basically have a belt, a scuba tank, and a regulator, a mask, and that's it. And he'll go down and he'll fish as frantically as he can, looking for lobsters under rocks, run out of air, shoot to the surface, get another tank, do it again. They do it up to 12 times a day for 2 weeks in a row during the season. If you're a scuba diver, I don't know how many people dive, but you wouldn't do that more than 3 times in a day, and you certainly wouldn't do it working under the conditions they're working, and you wouldn't do it for 2 weeks in a row. So as you can imagine, accidents in this fishery are really common. There's about 2,000 people involved in it, 120 accidents a year, 20 fatalities, and it's left these coastal communities along the Mosquito Coast really severely impacted, and a recent survey showed that 18% of working-age men have actually been debilitated by dive accidents. Now what that means is they're left unable to work, unable to provide for their families, and it has a massive social impact. So this experience taught me that who and how your seafood is caught actually does make a big difference. So the second stage on the journey takes us to Mozambique in southern Africa in 2009, working in the county called Inhambane, or the province called Inhambane in the south of the country. Now, Mozambique suffered from a very long and bloody civil war, which meant there was very little outside interest and investment in Mozambique. Although that was very tragic for people, there was one positive spin-off for marine wildlife because there was no investment in industrial fishing. So they have a very pristine marine environment. It's a hotspot for sharks and rays, like this whale shark, which is the biggest fish in the ocean. And as a result, people from all over the world go to Mozambique to dive and snorkel with these amazing creatures. That obviously creates a lot of opportunities for work and for tourism and generates a lot of revenue for the Mozambican economy. However, opening up to the world and having rich marine resources has also had another consequence in Mozambique for the small-scale fishermen. And that is that instead of avoiding sharks like they always used to, they now actually target them. A lot of infrastructure is being built in Mozambique by Chinese investment. They often bring Chinese labor And with that labour comes the demand and the access to the market for shark fins. 100 million sharks are killed every year to satisfy the growing demand in China for what's called yushi, which is shark fin soup or fish wing soup, which is considered to be a luxury product. Obviously, it's a very cruel product, but that doesn't seem to matter to the final consumer. It's traditional to serve at a wedding if you want to show that you're affluent and that you're doing well in life. The economics of this situation is really quite straightforward. A Mozambican fisherman can expect to earn $70 for a kilo of shark fin. That's equivalent to what a school teacher there would earn in a month, so the incentive is obviously very, very strong. By the time those shark fins get to Hong Kong, they can sell for up to $500 a kilo, and by the time it ends up in a bowl of soup in a restaurant or on a wedding guest's table, it can fetch up to $100 a bowl. Now, this isn't just a depressing story in supply and demand, there's also a lesson in here about unintended consequences. Because rather than waste the rest of the shark once it's been finned, local people have started eating it. Sharks are an apex predator, that means they're the top of the food chain, and they eat lots of small fish throughout their lifetime, which means they accumulate mercury, which means if you eat a lot of shark, there are negative health implications, especially for women who are pregnant and especially for children and the elderly. So this experience really showed me the complex nature of how the social, economic and environmental aspects of fisheries often interlink and produce unexpected consequences. The last part of this talk is from much closer to home. It's about the UK, and I've been working with the New Economics Foundation for the past 5 years, and part of our work on fisheries looks at the impact of what taking a rights-based approach to fisheries management means. Now, in order to explain that, you need a bit of background information. And the first thing to note is that fish are a common resource, so they belong, if that's the right word, they belong to all of us. That obviously can lead to problems, as every country will want to fish for those same species. So you need some level of international agreement and international management in order to avoid overfishing. Species like this cod or bass or mackerel or tuna migrate as well, so there's no point in having some kind of policy that's just for your own country. You need international cooperation. At EU level, every December, fisheries ministers meet and they take scientific advice on board about how much of each particular species they can take from each particular area. In this case, this depicts cod for the area off the south of Cornwall. So far, so good. So every country gets a percentage of that total catch, so in this case the UK, and when the UK government gets that total amount in tonnes for each species for each area, what they did is something that absolutely blew my mind, because they gave the rights to that fish away. They privatised the public fishery and basically handed out permanent fishing rights to anyone that could prove they had a track record of catching a particular fish in a particular area between 1994 and 1996. Now that might sound like it makes sense, but unfortunately there was a major problem with this, and that is that 3/4 of working fishermen, around 9,000 people, actually didn't keep track records. They weren't obliged by law to keep them, so they had no record of what they caught, so they couldn't prove it, so they got nothing. And that sort of dispossession has continued to the present day. 77% of fishing boats in this country are under 10 meters in length, and as you can guess, that is also, 3/4 of the employment coming from fisheries. As you'd expect with any market-based system, once those rights have been given away, concentration is going to take place. So bigger companies with deeper pockets can afford to buy up those rights, and less profitable, smaller fishermen will sell up and just exit the fishery. That concentration of fishing rights has reached such an extent that by last year, 2015, 98.5% of rights were held by the sector. And that's boats over 10 meters in length, members of producer organizations, which only represents about 16% of boats. So that means that 1.5% has to basically satisfy the needs of any other fisherman that wants to fish for quota species. It's also reached an extent in England in particular, where only 3 companies hold 61% of all the fishing rights. Now that might sound like it doesn't make a difference, but that actually affects all of us, because what's happening is it's no longer the state that's capturing the resource rent. That money is going straight into private hands. It also means that over time, fishermen have been forced to throw perfectly good edible fish overboard simply because they don't have the rights to catch it. That's this process of discarding, which is now being banned. The issue isn't fishermen being short-sighted, it's simply because they don't have the rights and it's illegal to land it. At a community level, this has meant that a whole new class of people have emerged called slipper skippers, fishermen that don't have to go to sea, don't even really need to have a boat. They just keep those rights and lease them out to people and make money that way. They just speculate with the fishing rights. So it's obviously changing the face of fishing communities around the country. It also means that the government can't take an adaptive approach to management, because if some environmental conditions change and there's more or less of a particular fish species in a particular area, the government can't just say, oh, well, we need to move quota across there, because the people that own it will say, well, no, you won't, we'll see you in court. So it basically means that there's this legal lock-in under human rights law, because a possession has been granted with those rights, which basically means that you can't be adaptive and everything takes a long time to resolve in court. The UK quota market is also worth over £1 billion. So as you can imagine, the government at the moment is not going to be very keen to get into any kind of compensation claims concerning fish quota. Now, I fundamentally believe that this is wrong and that we should take a very, very different approach to fisheries management. At NEF, we've been developing an alternative to the current quota system. So rather than taking a rights-based approach, we believe fisheries should be managed taking a performance-based approach. So rather than just saying, you had a place at the table and you caught this 20 years ago, here you go again, we should be saying, well, how do you actually perform in terms of generating societal benefits from the kind of fishing you do? So we think you should be employing a sort of criteria-based approach. You could take environmental criteria. For example, what kind of gear are you using? How good is it at catching the right species of the right size? Or how much fossil fuel do you use to get a ton of fish? Or how much damage do you do to the wider marine environment? Or you could look at social criteria. Working conditions is obviously a really big one. How many jobs do you generate for a ton of fish landed? Or how much of the value stays in the local economy? Or you could take an economic metric and you could say, who's the most profitable? Who's the least dependent on subsidies, for example? And we feel that taking this more holistic view of fisheries and actually trying to generate societal good by using the available data and information that we have will provide a much better result for fisheries management, and we need to scrap that kind of historic approach to allocating fishing rights. So I hope that these 3 stories have showed you that we need a safe, fair and sustainable approach to fisheries all around the world, and I very much hope that the next time you order fish or go to a restaurant or a fish and chip shop, that maybe you'll wonder or even ask how it was caught, where it was caught, or indeed who had the right to catch it. Thank you very much.